The sun had just begun its slow descent behind the distant hills, casting a warm, golden glow over the small city. The streets buzzed with energy, cars honked politely, children ran past in colorful dresses, and the faint aroma of fried street snacks mingled with the scent of fresh flowers. I could feel my heart racing as the wedding hall came into view, its grand facade glowing under strings of fairy lights, reflecting the excitement that had been building for weeks. Clutching my small, silk handbag, I stepped out of the taxi, my heels clicking softly against the cobblestone path. The moment I saw the hall, my breath caught. Vibrant marigold garlands hung from the entrance, and petals were scattered along the red carpet. Soft, instrumental music floated from inside, blending perfectly with the distant laughter of guests arriving in elegant dresses and crisp suits. The air was rich with celebration, candles flickered in lanterns, and the scent of jasmine and sandalwood mingled with the faint perfume of the wedding feast. I adjusted my hair nervously, smoothing down the edges of my dress. "You look beautiful," my reflection whispered back from the glass doors. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, my excitement almost bubbling over. This was my sister's day, a day I had imagined countless times since childhood, the dresses, the music, the laughter, the sense of family togetherness. Sparkles, and before we continue, if you love emotional, real-life stories like this, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more heartfelt tales, because what happens next is going to shock you. Inside, the hall was even more breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung low, casting tiny rainbows across the polished marble floor. Rows of chairs were lined perfectly, adorned with golden sashes, and at the center, a floral arch framed the stage where my sister would soon stand, radiant in her wedding dress. Guests were chatting animatedly, some snapping pictures with their phones, others laughing at stories being retold from the family's past. I scanned the crowd, hoping to catch a glimpse of my sister. She was there, glowing like a sunbeam, surrounded by friends and family, her laughter floating across the hall. "Finally, it's here," I whispered to myself, my excitement mingling with a touch of nervous anticipation. My parents waved me over, smiles stretching across their faces, though their eyes betrayed a hint of the usual tension that hovered in family gatherings. With my hand lightly brushing the back of my dress, I stepped forward toward the hall, eager to join the celebration, completely unaware that the evening I had imagined so vividly was about to take an unexpected turn. The warmth of the music, the glittering lights, and the laughter around me created a perfect bubble of joy, one that, in the next few moments, would be sharply contrasted by feelings I had never anticipated. For a moment, I stood there, letting the music wash over me, smiling as I watched guests settle into their seats. I adjusted the strap of my handbag and took a step forward, ready to find a place among my family. That was when a young usher in a neatly pressed uniform appeared at my side. "Madam, may I help you?" he asked politely, gesturing with his hand. "Yes," I said with a small smile. "I'm family. I just need to find my seat." He nodded, glanced briefly at a list clipped to his folder, and then turned, not toward the center of the hall, not toward the rows where my parents and relatives sat, but toward a narrow side passage near the entrance. I hesitated, assuming he was simply taking a shortcut. We walked past the glittering chairs, past guests laughing and greeting one another. I caught a glimpse of my sister in the distance, surrounded by relatives, her face glowing under the lights. My heart lifted for a second, until the usher stopped. "Your seat is here," he said. I looked around, confused. We were no longer in the hall. We stood in a hallway, a long, narrow corridor with plain walls, a few folding chairs lined against one side, and the faint echo of music drifting in from behind closed doors. "Here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think there's been a mistake." He shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry, madam. This is what I was told." My cheeks burned. I glanced back toward the hall, where the celebration continued uninterrupted. Through the open doorway, I could see golden chair covers, polished tables, and familiar faces laughing freely. No one seemed to notice me standing there, frozen between disbelief and humiliation. Slowly, I lowered myself onto one of the chairs. It creaked under my weight, loud in the quiet hallway. The contrast was painful, the warmth and joy inside the hall, and the cold, empty stillness where I sat. Guests passed by occasionally, some offering quick, curious glances before hurrying on, as if I were part of the furniture. I smoothed my dress, suddenly feeling overdressed and out of place. Why am I here? I wondered. Did I do something wrong? My mind raced through memories, searching for an explanation I couldn't find. From where I sat, I could hear my sister's laughter again, bright and carefree. I wanted to stand up, walk inside, and ask someone, anyone, what was happening. But my feet felt heavy, rooted to the floor by embarrassment. As the music swelled and applause erupted from the hall, a knot tightened in my chest. The excitement I had carried with me moments earlier began to dissolve, replaced by a sharp, aching realization. Sitting alone in that hallway, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet question forming, one that would soon demand an answer. Should I stay where I'm clearly not wanted, or finally choose myself? Time began to move strangely in that hallway. Minutes felt like hours as I sat there, my hands folded tightly in my lap, listening to the celebration that seemed to belong to everyone except me. Every burst of laughter from inside the hall felt like a reminder of where I wasn't. I leaned slightly forward, peering through the open doorway, unable to stop myself. Inside, my family looked happy. My cousins stood together near the stage, posing for photos, their smiles wide and effortless. An aunt adjusted her jewelry as she laughed at a joke someone whispered in her ear. My parents sat comfortably among relatives, clapping along to the music. No one looked toward the hallway. No one noticed the empty chair where I should have been. I swallowed hard. A group of guests walked past me, their footsteps echoing softly against the tiled floor. One woman slowed down, her eyes flicking over my dress, then to the plain chair beneath me. She leaned toward the man beside her and whispered something. They both glanced back at me before continuing on, their hushed laughter trailing behind them like a sting. My face grew hot. I lowered my gaze, pretending to adjust the hem of my dress, wishing I could disappear into the floor. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in. The lights were harsher here, no warm glow, no soft music, just bright bulbs and distant noise. I pulled out my phone, pretending to scroll, though I wasn't really reading anything. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen, perfect makeup, carefully styled hair, eyes shining with unshed tears. I had dressed with so much care, believing I belonged here. Now I felt foolish for trying. Another wave of applause erupted from inside the hall. I looked up just in time to see my sister lifted into the center of a group photo, her smile radiant. For a brief moment, I felt happy for her. Then the happiness cracked, giving way to a deep, aching loneliness. Am I really this easy to forget? I wondered. A child ran past the hallway, nearly bumping into my knees. His mother tugged him away quickly, casting me an apologetic glance before hurrying inside. The door swung shut behind them, muting the music slightly. The silence pressed down on me, heavy and uncomfortable. My chest tightened, and I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. Sitting there, invisible and misplaced, I felt something sink deep into my heart, a quiet but painful understanding. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about how little space I seemed to hold in my own family's world. As more laughter echoed from behind the doors, a thought began to form, sharp and clear through the haze of humiliation. If this is how they see me, why am I still here? I sat there for a few seconds longer, listening to the muffled music and applause behind the doors, until something inside me finally snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet breaking point, like a thread pulled too tight for too long. My hands trembled as I stood up, smoothing my dress one last time, even though there was no one left to impress. I looked down the hallway, empty now, silent except for the distant echo of celebration, and took a step forward. Each footstep felt heavier than the last, but with every move, the weight in my chest began to shift. I wasn't running away. I was choosing to leave. No one stopped me as I passed the entrance of the hall. The doors were half open, and for a brief moment, I paused. Inside, my family laughed, danced, and celebrated as if the world were perfect. My sister stood at the center, glowing under the lights. I waited, just for a second, hoping someone might notice me standing there. Hoping someone might ask, "Where are you going?" No one did. So I turned away. Outside, the night air wrapped around me, cool and gentle, a sharp contrast to the heat of humiliation burning inside. The wedding hall stood behind me, bright and loud, while the street ahead was quiet, lined with dim lamps and sleeping houses. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Leaves rustled softly as a breeze passed through the trees. I walked until the music faded completely, until all I could hear was the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I stopped near a small garden beside the road, sat on a low stone wall, and finally let myself exhale. My reflection stared back at me from a dark car window, eyes red, lips pressed together, but posture straighter than before. Why do I keep accepting this? I whispered into the night. Memories surfaced, birthdays where I was overlooked, family gatherings where my voice was drowned out, moments I had brushed aside, telling myself it didn't matter. Sitting there, under the open sky, it finally mattered. A lot. I pressed my palm against my chest, feeling my heartbeat steady. For the first time that evening, the embarrassment began to loosen its grip, replaced by something unfamiliar but powerful, clarity. I realized that staying where I wasn't respected hurt more than leaving ever could. As I stood up, brushing dust from my dress, a quiet resolve settled in. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know who would notice my absence, or if anyone would at all. But as I took another step forward, away from the hall and toward the unknown, I knew one thing with certainty: I had chosen myself. And that choice was only the beginning. I had just taken a few steps away from the garden when I heard someone call my name, softly at first, as if they weren't sure I would turn around. I froze. For a moment, I considered pretending I hadn't heard anything. But something in the voice made me stop. I turned and saw my cousin Amina standing beneath one of the streetlights. The yellow glow softened her worried expression as she walked toward me, her heels clicking lightly on the pavement. She looked out of place there, still dressed for the wedding, her bangles catching the light with every step. "I was looking for you," she said gently. "You disappeared." I let out a small, humorless laugh. "I didn't think anyone would notice." She frowned, shaking her head. "I noticed. And I'm sorry." Those words, simple as they were, hit harder than I expected. My throat tightened, and I looked away, focusing on the dark outline of trees lining the road. The night smelled faintly of dust and flowers from the wedding hall, a mix of celebration and reality. "I saw where they seated you," Amina continued quietly. "It wasn't right." I swallowed. "I kept telling myself it didn't matter," I said. But sitting there, it felt like I didn't belong to my own family. She reached out, placing a warm hand over mine. "You belong," she said firmly. "Don't let their choices make you doubt your worth." We stood there in silence for a moment, the distant music drifting through the air like an echo from another life. A car passed by slowly, headlights washing over us before disappearing down the road. Somewhere nearby, crickets chirped, filling the quiet spaces between our breaths. "You didn't do anything wrong," she added. "Sometimes people get so busy putting on a perfect show that they forget the people who matter." Her words settled into me, easing something tight and painful inside my chest. I felt my shoulders relax, just a little. For the first time since arriving at the wedding, I wasn't bracing myself for another disappointment. I was scared to leave, I admitted. Like I was overreacting. Amina smiled sadly. "Leaving was brave. Staying and shrinking yourself would have hurt more." I nodded, blinking back tears. She was right. Standing there under the open sky, supported by someone who truly saw me, the humiliation began to lose its power. It no longer defined the night, it was just a moment I had survived. As we started walking together, away from the noise and lights, I realized something important. Even when family fails you, kindness can still find you in unexpected places. And sometimes, that single act of understanding is enough to help you take your next step forward. Later that night, after the streets had grown quieter and the wedding lights were nothing more than a distant glow behind me, I found myself alone with my thoughts. The city felt different now, slower, softer. A thin moon hung above the rooftops, and a cool breeze brushed against my skin as I walked, my heels in my hand, letting the pavement ground me. With every step, memories rose uninvited. I remembered family dinners where my opinions were brushed aside with a quick laugh. Birthdays where my name was forgotten until the very end. Moments when I was expected to understand, to adjust, to stay quiet for the sake of keeping the peace. I had told myself it was normal. That this was just how families were. But sitting in that hallway tonight had stripped away every excuse. I stopped near a small roadside tea stall, now closed for the night, its wooden chairs stacked neatly in a corner. I sat on the edge of the curb, looking out at the empty road, and finally allowed myself to ask the question I had avoided for years. Why did I keep shrinking myself to fit into spaces where I was barely acknowledged? I realized then that my silence had taught them how to treat me. Every time I smiled through discomfort, every time I chose appearance over honesty, I had slowly erased my own boundaries. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted to belong. I deserve better than this, I said softly, my voice steady in the quiet night. The words felt strange on my tongue, but also powerful. For the first time, I understood that self-respect wasn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it was as simple as walking away. Sometimes, it meant choosing loneliness over humiliation. I thought about my sister, about how I had shown up for her again and again, believing love meant endurance. But love, I now understood, was not supposed to hurt like this. It wasn't meant to leave you sitting in hallways, questioning your worth. A sense of calm settled over me, gentle, but firm. I couldn't change my family overnight. I couldn't force them to see me differently. But I could change how I responded. I could stop accepting less than I deserved. As I stood up and continued walking, the night no longer felt heavy. It felt open, full of possibility. The pain of the evening hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something meaningful. This wasn't the end of my story with my family. But it was the moment I finally saw myself clearly. And with that clarity came strength, enough to face whatever came next. My phone vibrated just as I reached the corner of the quiet street. I almost ignored it. Part of me was tired of hoping for something that rarely came. But when I glanced at the screen, my breath caught. It was my mother. I stood there under the dim streetlight, the glow reflecting off the cracked pavement, my heart pounding louder than the distant sounds of the city. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen, memories rushing in, years of waiting for acknowledgement, for softness, for understanding. I answered. "Where did you go?" her voice asked, not angry, but uncertain. "Your sister noticed you weren't there." I closed my eyes. "I was seated in the hallway," I said quietly. I didn't feel like I belonged. There was a pause on the other end. Long enough to feel heavy. "I didn't know," she said finally. "Things got busy. We didn't think." "I know," I interrupted gently. "And I truly did. That's always been the problem." Another silence followed, thicker than before. Then she spoke again, softer this time. "You should have been inside. With us." The words came late, but they landed. Not as a cure, not as an apology that erased the night, but as an acknowledgement. And surprisingly, that was enough. "I'm okay," I said. And I meant it. I just needed to leave. After we hung up, I didn't feel the rush of relief I had once imagined. Instead, I felt calm. Grounded. The night air no longer felt cold, it felt honest. Amina was waiting nearby, leaning against her car. She looked up as I approached. "Everything okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. I think I finally am." We sat together for a while, watching the streetlights flicker, talking about small, ordinary things. And in that simplicity, I felt something shift permanently inside me. The wedding, the hallway, the whispers, they no longer defined me. As I headed home later that night, I caught my reflection in a shop window. The same dress. The same face. But my eyes looked different, steadier, clearer. I realized then that the twist wasn't someone else changing. It was me. I had walked away from a place that made me feel small, and in doing so, I had stepped into myself. The pain of the evening lingered, yes, but it no longer held power over me. It had taught me something far more valuable. Sometimes closure doesn't come with grand apologies or perfect endings. Sometimes it comes quietly, when you choose your dignity, your peace, and your worth. And that night, walking forward under an open sky, I knew I was stronger than I had ever been. If you're listening to this story right now, I want you to pause for a moment and think about the spaces you keep returning to, places, relationships, gatherings, where you feel invisible. The ones where you tell yourself to be patient, to stay quiet, to not make things uncomfortable for others. I used to believe that was strength. That endurance was the same thing as love. That night taught me otherwise. I'm standing here now, days later, as the early morning sun slips through my window, painting the walls in soft shades of gold. The city outside is waking up, vendors calling out, bicycles passing by, life moving forward whether we're ready or not. And in that gentle noise, I finally understand something I wish I had learned sooner. Self-respect is not selfish. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't need an audience. Sometimes, it simply means recognizing when a place that once felt like home no longer has room for you. And having the courage to step away without apologizing for it. For a long time, I believed staying silent would protect my relationships. I thought if I endured enough, people would eventually see my loyalty, my effort, my love. But silence doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes, it only teaches others how much they can take from you. Walking away from that wedding wasn't easy. It didn't feel powerful in the moment. It felt lonely, confusing, and deeply painful. But looking back now, I see it clearly, it was the first time I chose myself without guilt. If you ever find yourself sitting in a hallway, literal or emotional, while everyone else celebrates inside, remember this, your worth is not determined by the seat you're given. You don't have to beg for space where you belong. The right people will make room for you without being asked. I didn't lose my family that night. I found my boundaries. And boundaries don't close doors, they protect your heart. So if today you're struggling with a choice, unsure whether to stay or leave, ask yourself one simple question, is this costing me my self-respect? If the answer is yes, then walking away might not be the end of your story. It might be the beginning of a stronger, braver version of you. And that's a story always worth telling.